So what are the projects you're working on right now?
Sorry?
What are your projects that you're working on?
I'm trying to use robots to mimic several bat behaviors. And several behaviors of bats, for example, like bats.
Oh, bats do.
So, for example, bats that find insect prey sitting on leaves, so you get big vegetation leaves and then insects are captured from that. That's what I'm trying to model. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
You're still teaching human comparative physiology. What's that class?
It's a good turnout.
Yeah.
Lecture. So I took the lecture in 2019, and then I retook it last year, and then I graduated. Everyone was online. Everyone had my camera on. That was like, I hated the online format. Is it back to normal? Is it in person?
So Nick, how did you decide on this venue?
Well, we're looking for places in Cincinnati that people haven't been or haven't been in a while to open up the possibility for surprise and for thinking in new ways. And so this is one of those that was on my list in Cincinnati of places that I think is evocative and kind of a compelling space. So I just called the airport manager and asked.
Oh, great. Because I've never been inside here. So this is my first time inside the building.
Yeah, me as well.
Yeah.
Me as well. Well, I mean, when I first came to look at it, it was the first time. So, yeah, it's beautiful, huh?
Yeah.
So I'm going to announce that we're starting in a couple of minutes. We're missing Doug. That's the one person we're missing.
But he's here, right?
I don't know who the person is, so I can't even Google it.
I think he's here.
Hi. Good evening. Good evening. How's it going? How many people have been inside Lunken Airport terminal before? Yes, good. That means most of you haven't been here before. Pretty cool space, yeah? All right. Well, thanks for taking an adventure with us. I'm Nate Morehouse. I'm the director for a new interdisciplinary research institute at UC called IRiS, or the Institute for Research in Sensing. You probably knew that if you're already here. One of the things that we're doing this year and the next 2 years is these Alloy discussion series events. They're going to be set in unusual places around town. They're going to engage with music, poetry, art, and topics associated with sensing, which is the focus of our research institute. We're hoping to do about 8 of these a year for the next 3 years, and maybe beyond that. So I'm really excited that you're at our second one. Our first one was at the American Sign Museum. Feels like it was a week ago. It was a couple of weeks ago. We have another one coming up that's going to be at an amazing location in Camp Washington called the Swing House. It's an art house where an architect has removed the second and third floors of an Italian-made row house and attached a swing to the rafters. Of course, reinforced everything so it doesn't all fall apart. That one's going to be on hallucinations and the nature of perception. Similar kind of situation, similar vibe, okay? So we're going to keep looking for these unusual or liminal spaces around Cincinnati to have these curious conversations where we bring people together who probably, many of them, haven't met each other before. Actually, only knew half of the people we invited to this one before I emailed them. So anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about how we hope that this situation works today. I want to say a couple of things about how this is being supported. So we are supported by the University of Cincinnati through the Research2030 initiative. It's a big push to push the boundaries of what we know and understand about the world and what we can do in terms of research for the next 10 years. And we're also supported by the College of Engineering and Applied Sciences and the College of Arts and Sciences. So all of this funding right now is coming from UC, but we're branching out to other sources of support. So thanks to UC for the adventurousness of allowing us to try these kinds of things. Beyond that, I think the next thing on the agenda here is for us to start with a poetry reading by Maddie Wattenberg, who is here with us tonight. She's a PhD candidate in creative writing at the University of Cincinnati. She's also published a book called I.O. And she is a poet who writes oftentimes about eco-poetics, about ecofeminism, and I'm really excited. I have no idea what she's going to read for us tonight, but let's give a warm round of applause for Maddie.
Thank you so much, Nate, as I worked on this situation, for inviting me today. It's really cool to be in this space with you all. Let's try this on. This is part of the performance. Okay, I'll go one here. Thank you so much for having me here in this space. It's an opening for this conversation. I'm super excited to be in more of an interdisciplinary interaction with this material. And I'm going to read a couple poems. One is, start off with a shorter one that I felt like I had to read, knowing that Nate is a spider guy. Rumor has it. And this opening poem is also a little bit thinking about bringing nature into poetry and into sound and into language, which I think about a lot as well. Moving from the material to the representative word. So this poem is called Trapping the Spider. Did everyone hear me okay? Good? Get acoustics in here. Okay. Trapping the Spider. Could this be the queen bee's view, this blurry image of thought throwing its brow to the ground? Does tomorrow pull the worker's eye back toward work, even though today is not yet over? And the drone, does he seek death's occasions, even as he stares, as I am staring out this window? I see the trees on the other side, considering their golden turn, whether it's time to conserve the sun's thinning visitations. Soon they will expose the silence of their arms over the black road. In the book I am reading, the scientist loves the spider. He embraces the spider in phrases soft and sticky as her silk net, describes her work as, quote, leisurely wrapped about the captive, and soft, almost perfectly hemispheric.
Any writer who loves his subject properly will entrap her in sibilance, encumber her in perfection, the rhythm of his loving sentence. I am falling for the drumming, the orientation toward duty, if not determinism. Within each of the spider's eyes, he writes, is a glass body, a shield. The glass body is not like this cracked window where I'm watching the spider, tipsy on blood and sunlight, and mistaking glass edges for thread. Intimately connected to all of these systems, to water systems, to the production of food that's taking place in other states, in rural areas, and how that's all following this trail into the urban apartment. One thing I wanted to mention was early on I mentioned Elysia timida, which is a sea slug that, for those of you who don't know, can eat algae and then basically practice photosynthesis for a short time while it's digesting. And I was reading about this slug and thinking, the kind of poet that I aspire to be is this slug. That can take something in the world and then kind of keep producing light out of it for a while. And so there are other references in here that some of you will know. Hopefully, the other thing that I was thinking about is what it means to say I on the page, which is something we think about a lot in poetry, but thinking about the sort of isolated I, the humanist rationalist I, versus an I that is like very embedded in the world, the porousness of the I, and how to represent that on the page. And so, since I'm speaking, you can't see the visual of the poem. But one thing you might think about when the word I occurs is imagining, instead of the word I on the page, an asterisk that is sort of reaching in all directions. And in reverse, when I say the word asterisk, think about a speaker saying I instead. So those two things are kind of interchangeable. All right, and this poem is called Asterisk Bloom. Desire's hunter rises early, scans for the stars, float pale belly, reaching the sea's forehead. In my apartment, a membrane encircles the contents of the dream. With algae-puffed cheeks, I gut nestle chloroplasts, like Elysia timida, the light leaf. Upstream, a cow's kneecap, cupped muddy by disaster, becomes show, don't tell bone. A telephone pole rises out the skinned landscape. Testing the imagination's surface tension, I stick a pin in and it bursts. The farm salutes me with a flood. A birdless feather pokes through the night's rotting casing. Curls of hair coax oil into a pillow. My imagination orbits a rusty center. At the edge of my dream, I release a fish into the Mississippi, where it swells golden and condom-lipped, spawns 40,000 eggs. Neurons slur in their bowl. When fish tails raise sediment, algae find the newly disturbed past, nutrient-rich, and eat it. 3 centuries of purposeful breeding flake off, and gold reverts to carp. Effortlessly, the future folds into the current. The fish are not ill, just returned to their brownness. Each word is a fish scale, a camouflage, a photon-blitzed sequin. In my apartment, I lie locked as an oyster embracing a sand grit, the thought and irritation, irritating itself, larger, pinkening. In dream, a woman is snared within reason's milky periphery. Between my eyelids, algae like verdant rain. The body is a still place, a place even when thinking resists. From my back, the star green is beginning to look like a solution to progress. I wake up again, eggs having spackled blood upon their exit. On the sheets I mistook for a river, and the river I mistook for an altar. In my bathroom, water terminates the image. I pray at nothing, and nothing adorns my head, a death-spangled tiara. My foolishness is fish-sized, lodged in silt, flouting my mind's floor, where the river dries at its source, which we label regularly the mouth. Comfortingly linear, anticipation arrives. The sour bonbon melts at the bed's feet like a punctured cherry. I cut the corner of a plastic trap, watch ants arrive to a poison sweet as poison. All night they work like poetry or scissors, delineating history, shouldering oversized depths until the nest gridlocks. Returning water blunts the kitchen knife, petals crowbar open the bud's green skulls, robins disseminate a withered sun's dandruff, dawn's serrated argument. To marrow, to marry, tomorrow, to arrow, tomorrow I'll wake up, nests for nothing living in my hair. Quote, algae rise to the surface for the same purpose that incites leaves to form the crowns for trees. Pendulums running out of time or motion. Out the window, the tree's shadows swing, crowns sit shyly atop tree trunk scapulae. From beneath they appear like cracked teacups repaired by gold joinery. In dirt they link up beneath unsentimental skin, beetles indiscriminately feed. Behind the dream's window, algae jostle and suffocate on spun-out flagella until sunlight collapses like a photon machine in the sea. My dreams develop green appendages, and the contents spill into the apartment like newly hatched spiders from a silk bauble. The asterisk is a bacterial station, reach, soar node transponder, a word spore riding a molecule of spit, a sleepy binary code rustling zeros and ones like feathers in the digital nest. Is giving birth, divvying liver into liver and lung into lung, is carrying groceries under a rotten potato's twisted eye. Offspring from parthenogenesis or sex is two making one and one two. Is mutating under flimsy winter planets, is blinking, sleeping alone, is a stain of subjectivity on the sheets. Is watching clouds disassembled in the public of the three-story house. A pale green branch attached, all the dead branches remain attached, ornamented with bird mites, fleas, cloth moths, is a weaving. What's alive sequesters the dead with life, is a chronological parasite, is a head, time's skin tag, is a hyperlink to suffering, is installing a freeze-dried dream in the autonomic nervous system, is soaking through the work week's somatic washcloth, fish breaths stowaway, incalculable sum of asterisk. I've looked to find again at each center a scatter. I'll never know them from the inside. I'm going to end there. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Maddie. That was fascinating. Both of those poems were really evocative. Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a couple of other thank yous or recognitions that I need to make. The first is that we should recognize Ryan Paul, who provided the music that we did live. And just a shout out out to Ryan. He runs a local record label called Whited Sepulchre, which is a vinyl and cassette tape record label that mostly works with ambient and experimental music, but a huge range there. And he records under the name Openly Weep. So check out Ryan and Whited Sepulchre. So thanks again, Ryan, for your version of music for airports. We're both big ambient music nerds, and so like this opportunity to do something at airports like Brian Eno, nerddom for us. Yeah, and speaking of airports, we should all thank Fred Anderton, who is the airport manager here at Lunken Airport Terminal, for the adventurousness of letting us in. One last thing, the shop is open. I hear there might be even a discount. So if people want to do what we all do at airports, but haven't done in a long time because of COVID, which is to do an impulse buy in an airport shop, we also can offer you that. So don't hesitate to stick around for that. Okay. So the way that this works is this is meant to be a conversation. This is not a lecture. This is not a panel discussion. This is not a bunch of experts being really smart while you sit back and listen to them. This is meant to be a conversation, and the conversation is not just meant to be amongst the group that are in the slightly more comfortable chairs in front of you. It's meant to include you, too. This really works best if you chime in, okay? So we have picked people that we think have interesting perspectives on the subject of biomimicry and bio-inspired design, but we're also really interested in your ideas, your thoughts, your questions, etc. Now, one thing that we've done in the past is to actually use microphones to help you to be heard. But this is a super echoey space, and we could not get our microphones to keep from screeching at you when we set them up. So we're just asking for you to raise your hand and then ask something out loud. It'll become more comfortable as more people do it, okay? So the first thing that I'd like to do, I'm gonna come sit down here. I'm loud, so I don't ever need a microphone. I'm going to introduce the group of people that we've invited to sit in the slightly more comfortable chairs here. All right. So I'm going to start with Elke Bushbeck here. So Elke is a professor in biological sciences, and she studies unusual visual systems, especially in insects and spiders. She's interested in their development, their evolution, and she's also really interested in how those kinds of unusual eyes can be translated into new ways of sensing the world in engineered solutions. And a couple of her research insights have translated into real engineered solutions to novel sensing devices. So, hi, Elke. person I'd like to introduce. Dieter's work is absolutely fascinating. It will become obvious right away from the fact that he is a faculty member in psychology, biological sciences, mechanical engineering, and electrical engineering. So if there's anybody that's interdisciplinary in the room, it's Dieter. He works on bat-inspired robotics, thinking about how bats use sonar to navigate the world and how that might be used to inspire new ways of moving around the world with robotics. One of the interesting things about sonar is that it actually has a lot of limitations for being able to help or assist in navigation, and yet bats are able, if we turn the lights off, bats would have no problem in here and we would be all stumbling around. So they're able to make a lot with a modality that's very limiting, and so Dieter's work and his lab's work really focuses on understanding how bats do this and how it could be reproduced in robotics to better understand navigation. Is that okay?
That's correct, yes.
Yes, all right. We're going to take our masks off if we feel comfortable here, just so that this is a little bit more natural. So that's up to folks here. And this is just meant to be a conversation. And so we'll just kind of break the ice a little bit. What I'd love to know, and anybody can chime in on this, is just tell us a little bit more about how biomimicry influences what you do, or how do you interact with biomimicry as a concept? So who wants to share that with us first?
Any idea? I don't really know, but it must be many thousands, right?
Depends on the size of the insect.
Thank you, that is right, because insects come in various different sizes, and yet every single one of them would be a very small fraction of this airplane, and yet any one of them would be able to buzz around here and fly. And there are some which can hover and even fly backwards, and there's some which can go right and left very quickly, and they're very small. And yet they do a much better job than any airplane that we have designed. And so I would say we remain to have our work cut out. And so I like insects, I like vision, because eyes, I guess I relate to, as human beings, relate to eyes very much, because that's a very prominent sense for us. And yet there are eyes which can see light that we can't see, the eyes which can see UV, other eyes that can see polarization, so that's, certain way how wavelengths swing. And it's just absolutely fascinating because it's a doorway to more things which are out there. And the doorway is how, insects can navigate. And also they can be very inspiring because they're so small, they have really great sensors. And so, especially when we need small sensors, they can be a great inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think beyond inspiration, the natural world provides a wealth of solutions.
A lot of solutions.
And so it's just a matter of us kind of turning off some of our preconceptions and being willing to the natural world. And so that's what I was doing, is looking at brand strategy and how we can build a brand, and thinking about, because there's a lot of examples of biomimicry, product design, and solutions like sensing and things like that. But I pushed it to a more strategy level, thinking about what is a brand. The brand is it's a collection of experiences. It's really, the brand is the purpose of the brand. Biomimicry, always trying to find the purpose. It's not what you're designing, it's what you want your design to do. And you want your brand to kind of create that community for the exchange of resources. That's really the essence of a brand, is a function. And so then you can start to find equivalents in nature that do the same thing. But then I started to apply the biomimicry thinking to the marketplace as well. Where is a brand being introduced? Is it a saturated market? Is it a brand new market? And then you can look at ecosystems, compare that. Like it's a type 1 ecosystem, type 2 ecosystem. Then you can find species that excel in those environments and use those behaviors and those strategies and those systems that those organisms have. And if you can apply that kind of behavior to your brand, that gives you a jump start on your success for building a brand. So it's taking it beyond just the functional and taking it to more of a strategic place, which is where that's where I started to get excited about the things. And then looking today, just at, some of the references for sensing and things like that, it's pretty exciting. There's so much out there that if we just start paying attention, and like you said, dragonflies can fly circles around this, so it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I love the point about humility, that there's so many things that we haven't solved that are solved already out in the natural world.
Pretty arrogant species.
Yeah, absolutely. So having the humility to listen, listening is a humbling experience, but to listen to nature in these situations is powerful. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I started looking at bio-inspired designs and what it can do to buildings when I saw that buildings actually are a very static species throughout the year. Season changes, but buildings won't change. And we dress differently depending upon season. Animals have their own ways, right? Yeah. They add fur, fur is released and everything, So everybody has its own behavior. Building also has its own behavior. So that's what I started looking at. Buildings also behave very differently, thermal behavior of buildings. And then like our body, whether we like it or not, we try to keep building temperatures, it's a very narrow range. And then how do you do it, That's why we need huge mechanical systems to keep it happening. So imagine maybe a bug and another mechanical system around it to keep what the bug wants to do. That's what is actually happening. And then I thought, not only it's adding a lot of energy load on the buildings, but it is also, when energy is used, it's also been released as a pollutant. It's just one building, and then you look at thousands and thousands of buildings in one city, then in the region, and I said, we need to look at we need to look at more smarter solutions. And so that's how I was inspired to look at nature, then natural designs. And when I started out of my academic journey, I was in Montana that year. I worked there for 1 year. I was in Bozeman, Montana, and then I heard about biomimicry. Jenny Peñas, who is actually Missoula based. I don't know if you read the book Biomimicry that she wrote some time back. Very inspiring book, highly recommended. And I thought, maybe that's really triggered my interest. And then I started looking at more and more. We'll come back to the discussion, what that more is.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I love that idea of buildings as having behaviors, but not being able to change quite as dramatically as many natural systems. Yeah.
Or migrate.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or migrate. Yeah. Because animals can. Yeah. And buildings, that's why I said buildings are static in that way as well.
A lot of people do too. Yeah. Let's go to Florida, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, speaking of movement, I mean, this is really at the heart of how you think about biological inspiration. Yeah, Dieter?
Yeah, well, I think I come at this from a slightly different angle. So I'm trying to model what an animal does. So I'm mostly interested in understanding what the animal does. So if I come up with solutions, they kind of happen by accident. So that's not really my end goal. I'm not in this game to sell anything or to better anything. Just to understand what the animal does. And maybe at the end, you come up with something that's useful. But yeah.
So how does reproducing that, help us to better understand how reproducing that in an engineered system gets you closer to that goal? Well, you're looking for the core principles that the animal might be using
I think there are two interesting things about what you say. So I think there are two ways to look at biomimicry. So the first one is to look at nature as a list of solutions. You could say, well, I want to have an animal or a robot that swims better. And let's go and find an animal that swims, try to study it. And that's the bit that's often as difficult as building the stuff. But try to study how it works, and then we copy it, and we're very happy campers. There's another way of looking at it, I think, and that's more like a principled way. Like, okay, try to see what are the principles of design you find in nature, which is a little bit less well defined. But I think it's also very, very interesting to try and see what is it that makes these animals work. That's a little bit more abstract and maybe a little bit more speculative.
I don't find it so different actually from how we tend to approach, biology. It really starts with how does this animal see the world, and I mean that's how it's been for me in the past, and how I just happened to stumble across really interesting designs, but I didn't look at them as an engineering solution. It's more like, what do they see? How do they see? How does it work? And then the rest kind of is more like
what its behavior is basically adapted to its environment, right? So it depends but it is different, because if you're going to nature with a problem that you're trying to solve, you're probably more focused on the context. But if you're just looking for inspiration for great ideas, then maybe that's not as critical. But I think it does kind of frame it up though, doesn't it?
Well, I think the problem is a priori, you don't know what the animal is trying to solve. So you look at this from the outside, but the animal has huge constraints, or plants as well, but they have huge constraints, a huge history. And so it's very difficult to say, well, this is what this thing is for, I'm going to copy it. And if you take that out of the evolutionary context and ecological context, you might be looking at a completely different problem. Right. So I think the first thing we do is maybe just be naive and study the animal to its full extent. And then we know what the animal is doing, and then we know what the solution is. The other way around is a little bit presumptive, I think, sometimes.
It can blind you to what the animal's actually doing if you come in with a particular agenda, right? And again, I would just appeal to the kind of humility of listening, right? Because the world that these animals or plants or fungi live in is totally different. Their experience of the world is totally different than we could even imagine.
Right, I was about to say that, like, when I try to look at biomimicry and its applications in design, we look at the basic principles of design in natural designs, not necessarily try to mimic the form of an organism or specific aspects. I think it is critical to understand the context within which that species exists, and also what are the other things that they're trying to do, and what is it that makes it that design, how can that design make them more successful in there. I would say instead of successful, sometimes I like to use the word first to survive and then successful. And then look at buildings. What is the context of the building, what type of climate it is in, what type of building it is, and what are the needs, and then look at what is it that we wish to achieve through that, rather than just looking at like a butterfly shaped buildings or other thing. It would be unusable. So I think that is that idea, like, yeah, it's beautiful, but may or may not be directly useful for buildings, because then buildings has their own systems, own ways of doing it, and how we use it as well. So I found it slightly, at some point of time, it kind of clashes. And some people think biomimicry can be used, and there are also some people who were of the opinion that it cannot be used. So it's a quite interesting idea. However, my approach or my way of looking at it is buildings. I particularly look at more of the building skin, which is the envelope. That is what comes in contact with sun, with the heat, temperature, air, water, all those things, moisture, everything, and then it still remain more or less the static. And then that's where I look at natural designs, organisms where Herculean beetle, for example, like moisture-based, moisture can change the color of the beetle, right? Then there is a tortoise beetle, changes the color. Butterfly is a really good example. When basking, they can change the angle, and it looks beautiful because depending on how much heat or sun they need, it looks beautiful. And then it's like directly related to heating and cooling. If we need to heat like winter time, can our buildings do something so that I get more sun, particularly in Ohio when we get some sun, and then and then benefit from it and then come back. But then not all buildings, like it could be very expensive, kinetic structure. So there are there could be some conflicts, but those are the potential ideas. So I'm more interested in skin, and therefore, if we have to think of the skins which can be smarter, which can be sensitive like organisms, then what is it that we can do on the building skins in terms of the sensors? That's how I come to sensors. Then, like if there is too much of heat, if it is additional heat, can I store it, use it later when I need it? Or if there is too much of pressure, wind pressure, like certain animals actually work with that pressure, then how can I store that and can I capture that energy? So in general, I look at, can I use surfaces in a way that can be used to capture the energy, and then again apply to all the buildings. We can at least gather a lot of energy.
But then you've got glass, steel, and masonry.
So that's a system. But I think even within that system, I think we're looking at, and you are helping me or focusing the discussion by, there is a system like column to columns. Mm-hmm. Within that, there is a glass. Then the question is, can you do something with the glass or the glass layer? Can you do with what's happening between the two columns and glass, maybe some other material as well? And that is what is very, very fascinating.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Have you been inspired at all by desert plants?
Yes.
And how they deal with the sun being down?
Yes, and it's, in one of the published article, I was also looking at a very small frog that actually isn't from, I'm forgetting the actual biological name of the frog, which is very small in extreme heat. What that frog does is it just doesn't move much and store its fluids in there. It's a very amazing feature. So small is related to form of the building. Less movement is like a less so-called use of building, less movement. It's very amazing what those animals are doing, and I'm sure the plant, those are great examples as well, where they maintain the moisture inside. It's a great example, and also the peripheral design.
Yeah, like the barrel cactus.
Barrel cactus is like self shading, and it's quite amazing. I think we've been only able to use some of the only few parts.
I really like what you said with surfaces and smart surfaces that can change. And I have to think of a bearded dragon that I have at home. And every time I take her out of the sun, she turns black. And I think what she does is actually putting black pigment out in order to absorb certain wavelengths. Actually, I've been itching to sometimes take different lights and to see if there's specific wavelengths that she responds differently. But basically, that's what you would need, right? A building surface which turns black whenever it gets too cold to absorb more, and then becomes shiny to reflect back when it gets
exactly. And I actually gave and that's a great example as well, because sometime back there was a good article in Nature about chameleon. How can they change color? So and so this is a slightly different thing than what you're saying. Depending on their mood, when they are in a mating season, their color changes. So those are like buildings also has their own moods. Like
Yeah.
all office buildings, yeah, it just starts work. Lights, everything is on at 8, 9 o'clock. Then after 6 o'clock, it goes down and then comes back again. Lunchtime, there's some slowdown, something like that. So I was wondering, can buildings also through those smart panel system, can they show their moods of the building as well? And it's more than just recording and clicking, also showing the mood of the building. And just imagine, like, if you're flying or maybe driving through the city, you're looking at that building, it's super angry or
a squid on a colored checkerboard pattern, and they'll completely take that pattern, and it's really unclear how every piece of that squid knows which color it needs to turn. It's fascinating.
Superorganism. We'd have to figure that out. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
So you guys have been talking about mimicry at the organism level or even like the biome level. And this might be a question for the modifier side of things. But what about looking at more deeper than that in like the cellular structure, what cells are doing, what the metabolism is doing? So, you want your ability, say, to like sense heat. Okay, what about looking at the cells and the metabolism on the other sensory systems specifically, or nervous systems within the organism, and not just the organism as a whole?
Well, I mean, that's you definitely go to different levels. You got the micro, the macro, and the maxi level when you're looking at biomimicry. Could you look at, I mean, the gecko is a prime example of biomimicry. I can climb up a wall, how a gecko can stick to glass. And you think of it, it's strictly the cilia and the muscle structure beneath that gives it that ability to do that. But then that's working within the overall structure of the foot, which is working within the overall structure of the animal itself. And so there's just all these layers you peel back to understand that. And there's inspiration in all of that.
Right,
So.
because, along with the evolutionary tree, we're going to find some similar things that are either, about adaptively or convergently, and thinking about the way that comes into play, because you can look at multiple organisms that do this one thing. So what is it that's in common that's causing them to do that thing?
Great.
It might be key insight.
So the cell, at the level of the cell, there's so much communication between different organelles and signaling pathways, which if you want, you could look like a little bit more of an ion of a kind as a sensor too, or,
There's super complex and different, so that's another thing. And once you get to that level.
Well, probably the best idea of things mimicked on a cellular level, or maybe everything that's to do with artificial neural networks, I would think. That's probably the prime example where people really try to recreate some of the aspects of what these cells are doing and how they form networks and all of that. So that's about the only idea I can think of top of my mind.
neural networks for sure. I mean, people have simulated cortex kind of organizations and patterns that take place in cortex.
Yeah. And again, it varies in level of abstraction, right? So, I mean, at one end of the spectrum, it's very abstract. It's just matrix computation, and there's not a lot of cellular inspiration to be found. And at the other level, you've got people that really look at how the individual cell properties, which are complex in itself, how they are exploited to build networks. And there's a little bit, I mean, getting those to get, at one end, you can, if you abstract it, you can build huge nets and very complex stuff. At the other end, you can build very tiny nets that do also complex stuff maybe, but merging them, that's just difficult at this point, I think. It's too complex.
The Don't you think there is a huge, or there's a systematic difference between those things? If you have neural networks, they mimic the organization of things, versus when we say we mimic the cellular structure, or we mimic the way things are in nature, the mechanisms of nature, then we mimic the actual mechanism of how they change or interact, versus a neural network is a mimicking of how these things communicate. It's not necessarily the way they exchange information.
But that's all still biomimicry, I think.
No, I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
not. It's just two different
Yeah,
ways of
definitely.
mimicking,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
Well, it all depends. I mean, people have done things where they try to model a very tiny number of cells very accurately, and things like timing and how they communicate, and even neurotransmitters and how they communicate over long distances. So it becomes very, very complex. It's just something you can do only for small clumps of cells. So it does exist, I would think, but I see what you're saying. At the other end, it's very abstract, and the question is, are you still modeling a cell or any cell at all? And that's a little bit a question I have for you. Listening to your story, I was wondering to what extent are you still modeling or mimicking any animal at all, if you talk about some of these things. So if you talk about shading buildings or changing the colors or something like that, are you still talking about any specific animal? And are you still, I mean, okay, let me rephrase the question. Is the cost you pay by telling yourself, I want to mimic animals or plants or whatever, is that still a reasonable cost to pay to let go of the freedom you have if you're just an engineer and you say, well, everything goes. I mean, I can just solve the problem whatever I want in whatever way I want.
Sure. Before I respond to that question, I think to me it's very clear that the way you're thinking is like very detailed, trying to make it practical, engineered working solution. You are at that level, and when I'm talking about building, I think I'm talking about biomimicry at multiple scales. Some are at micro to macro. Some are pure mimicking certain, say, shading capabilities to versus in some cases maybe there is no mimicking, but then there is some principles are mimicked, like the question that you were mentioning, that how does certain animal sense the temperature and mitigate it that way. So it could be regular building, but it can be applied in there as well. So those are just the scales and different levels of application. Then to answer your question, because it's building and eventually somebody is paying for that, money is very, very important, and not many people, or most of the times, client would say, I don't have enough money. So that happens. So in that case, there are the buildings which kind of mimics this. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's mimicking the form because it's very related to architecture. It looks kind of, more evocative, kind of cool looking. But then I'm also interested in looking at, is it also functional? Which is what is the main, so it could be functional, but then there has to be like trade-off, like, okay, so I'm paying X amount of dollars to be more aesthetically pleasing, but then am I getting some performative results with that? If it is balancing out, it could be an easy sell, but it may or may not be. Sometimes ideas are new, technology is new, obviously it could be very expensive. I think some cases, yes, it could be a test bed project, right? May put in more money, but then 30 years, 50 years later, it can become a mainstream project. I'll just give you an example of that, like Windows. Single pane Windows, now we have triple pane Windows, right? So similarly, who knows, some few things might change. And then that is also partly answering your question, am I looking at component of the building or the whole building? So mostly it is more at the component level, because it's easy to design, easy to fabricate product, and easy to commercialize.
But this is, so I just want to jump in here because there's a couple of things that strike me as being different in the natural world. One is that components need to add up to a functioning organism, right? So there is this requirement of functionality at the level of the whole unit, right? The other is that things are optimized in the natural world on a life cycle basis, and things are not optimized on a life cycle basis in the human world. You know, if it costs less now and it looks great, who cares what it does in 30 years, right? Well, the animal really cares what it does in 30 years, and it's optimizing for that 30 or 40-year lifespan. But oftentimes when we do this, we don't think about, we kind of defer the cost that might accrue later. And I wonder how biomimicry could help us to think in a more life cycle way about our solutions.
But at the core of biomimicry is life's principles. You know, and honestly, I think that's where you're supposed to stay focused and bring you back to center on, you know, interacting with the environment, use of resources, locally attuned, all the 6 key elements of the life's principles. But that, and that's what Janine said. It says nature doesn't foul its own nest. It knows that it's here for the long haul. So it has to be, and it's like the 7th generation kind of concept. You know, we're not focused on here. We're thinking about them, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next, because we're designing things that are going to be here, either going to be here for a long time, or you want to be able to use them for a long time. So
I think this goes back to these constraints. So I mean, what you're saying basically is that nature has some constraints engineers don't really need to worry about. And I think if you're really honest about driving the biomimicry thing to the end, then you're going to run into the same constraints as these animals have, and that's just counterproductive as an engineer. So I'm not always, I mean, airplanes fly not like birds, and there's a good reason for that. If we were still trying to find a flapping airplane, it would still be cycling or to Dubai or something. So, so I'm just trying to, I think, put some weight on the other side of the balance. That it's not a free solution. Far from it. I mean,
that's true.
Nature has to pay dearly for what it's doing. And even to the extent that it's fouls to the nest, I mean, a lot of animals would just happily graze their whole fields and starve. And then that's the classic rabbits and wolves scenario where you get more rabbits, all the rabbits eat the food, no more rabbits, okay. So all that stuff. So I don't know that we should think about nature that idealistically, but that's not.
Yeah, that's fair. Anirudh, do you want to chime in here?
So I kind of have a question for all of you. There are different mimicking actions that we look at, and if we are working on something that requires multiple such actions, so does bringing them together give you some challenges or problems? For example,
at multiple animals and then try to see how it can fit it in maybe certain design. But then it's the question that then we are so adamant about, hey, this is the result that I want, and then hopefully we'll know what was wrong about it in maybe 10 years down the line. So that is something that even I think about. Like, should we force something into buildings because that is a need for today? Or
when you're inspired with animals, also to Dieter's point, I think it helps when you understand the biology of how it evolved, because there are certain traits in how animals work where it has to do more with evolutionary history. I saw a great example, our retinoids inside out, and all the the axon, so the projection from the retina go in the middle of the eye, so you have to have a hole to get it out. It's like, from an engineering point of view, you would never, construct it that way. But if you look at the evolutionary history, they came probably from something that was flat, looked at all sorts of different directions, and so somehow, as you follow how the eye, or reconstruct how this eye may have been evolved, it makes a lot more sense. And so I think when you try to learn from animals, you need to take this into account and take those things which are really good in engineering solutions, and then leave some other ones out.
Yeah. And again, the question is quite interesting. It's like, and going back to what I was saying, like, so can we copy multiple animals to do what buildings can do, but do it more smartly? The other question is, can buildings be designed and built differently? In fact, one example is that was reading about the vernacular bridges in northeast of India. They use fig tree to make bridges. It's very interesting. I don't know how exactly how it is made, but those are long bridges made out of fig trees, and it's like it's like a network of wood. It's all organic. So question is, why use steel and concrete in buildings? Can we not use wood?
Yeah.
So that's a question, that I was thinking, like, so why use like 10 different animal designs to think of, how can we make building which is wrong, in itself, and fix it? Instead, can we not have a paradigm shift and see how can buildings be built in a different ways? So there are many advantages of that. Life cycle cost, a lot of embodied energy will be reduced. All this warming climate, part of it is building materials. We said we have less vegetation, so it will bring in vegetation, habitation, and a lot of these things. But question is how and then when. So.
A couple folks that wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I guess so there's been a lot of talk, it seems like it's focusing on form. But I'm wondering if you guys can maybe comment on like mimicking the ways in which animals exploit their environment, the non-biological things, and how we are organisms jigger the world in creative ways. Like the one thing that popped in mind, maybe because of things like the spider builds this web. It's not organic. Well, I guess it's kind of like this weird mixture. But then that web becomes like an extension of the sensory system. Right, in a very interesting way. So it's like it's creating the environment, it's restructuring the environment in a way in which you can leverage the environment and take advantage of the environment. And that, I guess, sort of has to do with form, but also maybe has a lot to do with function. I guess in some respects.
Both.
Well, and this deals with branding strategy too. How do you create a kind of an ecosystem where you can advantage yourself by building the environment that you would not want. Ecosystem engineering almost.
It is, but it's finding the right analogies and the right parallels from, because you're going from the marketing world to the natural world and then back to the marketing world. So you have to be able to make those translations and understand and find those champion species that excel in that environment that you're trying to think about. And look at those behaviors and look at those system-wide things that they do. It's not just their form; it's how they interact. And there's a whole list of what are the attributes of a pioneer species in a type 1 ecosystem, and you'll find all the what kind of reproduction is it? What kind of how do they interact with the food sources? How do they protect themselves in that environment? How do they fend off getting eaten or by and so it's all those things, but then you have to be able to translate that back into a marketable solution or a building solution or an engineering solution. You have to be able to take those things and go backwards too. So, but yeah, that's a great point, because it's not just form; it's well beyond that.
Form is definitely one of the part when it's individual, but when it's a group structure, I mean, I would relate to your question to a building, to a neighborhood, to a city, and then again, something that we were discussing, like then how do we know, like inputs from one system, output of one system can become input of other system and other things, and so on and so forth. So therefore, maybe we need a ecology of senses to know all those things, so that then everybody can try to feed off each other. Uh, and if a person like me would think, okay, if that is the case, then maybe different either organisms will have different forms, different roles. When I try to look at our cities, neighborhoods, everything looks same. It's like a cookie cutter approach, right? When we are in a plane, we just see like similar type of clusters. So I think we created a lot of homogeneous system, and then put in too much of energy to then try to balance it off.
Could I make one more point?
Sure.
Sorry.
Absolutely.
Because another point, thinking about that, when you kind of pull back and look at the ecosystem wide, then you can start to think about symbiotics and mutualisms and interactions of all these organisms and how they, to your point, how there is no waste in nature really. I mean, it's so how do they feed off of each other? How do they connect together? And so there might be 2 or 3 organisms that are solving the one problem that you have. So
I'm going to take us to the dark side for a little bit. I don't want to ignore our web audience, because there are people that are chiming in that aren't even here with us right now. And one of these is going to bring us to a slightly darker place. So are there ways to avoid potentially pro-social biomimicry breakthroughs getting used for military or anti-social applications? So how do we use this approach judiciously, or is there no way to keep other interests from being inspired and using this for things that we might think of as social harm?
I'm not sure how you would do that.
I think it's a really tough one, and it extends not just to biomimicry, but to any invention that can be made in the best intention, can be completely misused. And it seems the more powerful an invention is, the more badly it can be used. So really, it's like the 2 different sides of it. And to me, biomimicry is similar in that way.
I agree. But then also we see a lot of invention on military side because it's a priority. So there's a lot of money there for invention as well.
Research dollars.
And the insect vision and flight is much of that research over the years has been funded by the Air Force Office of Scientific Research because of interests in autonomous vehicle control things. Yeah. So.
And they're looking at the squid too. I mean, for camouflage. There's work being done around that.
Well, I hope we responded to that question.
I don't know that we
to some
did.
extent.
Jack, did you have
Well,
something?
facial recognition is another field that I think is exactly in line with what that question is asking, because I know facial recognition is a huge field of research in not just primates and humans, but in animals too. I think that it's definitely a technology that could go either way, pro-social or anti-social. I think that's just an interesting thought piece for that kind of question.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that actually looking at this whole thing from a biological point of view highlights the problems, but also suggests some solutions. So you could think of these things like kind of arms race, and it's better for every party to kind of advance and have an edge over the other guys. And on the other hand, biology also suggests that these things often come to kind of an equilibrium, or maybe at some point it doesn't really make sense anymore to invest yet more in warfare. So I think it's interesting to see that biomimicry then maybe in itself can be regulated or self-regulates to another biologically inspired theory. And it's nice to see that, for example, I think most of the Nobel Prizes for economy in the last years have been given to game theory people. It just shows that people like that kind of stuff. I don't know, that means it's good stuff, but it's at least likable stuff. So I think that's funny to see, kind of ironic to some extent.
Well, let me ask this, because you hinted at this earlier. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a pushback point. I don't know how much, but I've always wondered too, put the question online about using explosives for co-social or anti-social reasons, I guess. It would also depend maybe on the context in which the solution that you're taking can actually be applied to whatever the solution is. That's not necessarily just a solution for this particular question, I guess, but I also wonder, so if there's really no transfer between even like the best case outcome for a biological system or a biological art system to be applied to a different context, then I think that throws the question out automatically. But I also want, or maybe to throw in like, context is also specified partially by within in the context. So it's kind of like if the context is really meant after it was useful, therefore it might not be applicable to a manipulation tactic, I guess. So maybe that's something to keep in mind. Maybe it's not as bad as it seems.
So some solutions may not be manipulatable into.
They might be realistic for specific problems for specific organisms, and might be a good solution for that particular organism, but does it transfer to a completely different system? It depends on the development system, and also in the same context to be a part of that system. So maybe if the context is different, then it doesn't even, like, that's not really a weird place to go.
Yeah, for example, solutions to social cooperation.
Yeah.
You know, and for example, social insects. Yeah. Well, I'm going to take this one step further into the dark side, which is to ask, are there things we don't want to mimic?
I'm not too happy with the Black Widow, you know.
Maybe we really don't want, to use mosquitoes, but it turns out the mosquitoes are actually being used to inspire needles that don't hurt so much, that don't deal so much tissue damage. So even the things that we hate, but obviously, you hinted at this earlier, Dieter, the idea that we shouldn't necessarily be glorifying nature, because oftentimes nature does things that we can't morally support. And so the question is, are there limits to what is wise to use to inspire our own solutions?
Probably. There's questions behind
that.
you
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this is kind of related to Sierra's comment and maybe more the first dark question. But one thing I've been thinking with this conversation is that you have biomimicry where you have a context and you're trying to make something behave a certain way in it. And so you're trying to create the organism, so to speak, but there's also sort of like, I'm thinking the opposite, sort of biomirroring, where you give it so typically we have the thing where we want to create the behavior, but you can also go the route of trying to get the context match. So I'm thinking like, for example, normally we're thinking, how can we get
I think I understand what you're gesturing at, which is that one is to try to get the behavior and the other is to try to reproduce the context in some way that gets it. Is that kind of where you're headed?
How you can stop people from perceiving, like the way you advertise or brand the thing you're making. So for example, Boston Dynamics makes these cool robots that use dynamics that are much more similar to how we move as opposed to the earlier clunkier robots that, move the way you imagine robots, for example, but it's not really robot inspired. But the way you could design these robots such that they need you to use them in a certain way, right? So I'm thinking, for example, it's not really biomimicry when we watch how people walk in an area and then we build sidewalks where they walk, rather than building sidewalks and hoping we use them. We can kind of reverse engineer. I think it's not the perfect solution, because obviously if you look at a robot moving very well, you can always think this would do very well in the military, but also you can perhaps design it in a way that it doesn't come to mind to use it that way. So sort of a user experience way where you're not trying to get the behavior, but you're trying to get them to view the context in a certain way.
Can I give you an example, and then you tell me whether that's what you mean by your question? So there is this concern about, I can't see you, so I hope you're still there. I'm not just,
She is.
okay, so there is a concern about when people interact with the robots, they're very easily tricked, right? So it's very easy to trick people and think that the robot does something the robot is not doing. So you can people fall in love with their artificial pets, or they easily attribute things to robots if they move in a proper way that are actually not there, like they're just smarter, more honest, or whatever than they actually are. And the question is, should you build a robot that tricks people to think that the robot is doing more than it is? Even if the people feel perfectly fine about that, is that morally acceptable? Is that the question, or is that completely?
I think I don't necessarily have a question. It's more that, like, the first point you made where, like this little toy dog or that you get for your kid, you don't look at that and think, I can militarize this and send it to war. That you can have if we can have things in mimic nature, we can also try to engineer how we respond to them. So we can try to create devices or buildings that such that they induce responses from us that are beneficial, that aren't antisocial, so that we can design these things, keeping in mind that we have a response to them. Like we could build, a very angry-looking robot, and then I feel like it's a lot easier for people to be like, oh, this is an angry war machine, as opposed to, oh, I'm not saying to do that, but I'm saying that as a general idea, you can design things such that people will use them in certain situations more likely than others, because of how they perceive certain features of them.
There's a question.
I would argue that if you have a good algorithm that mimics, another person at least, or that could also be used in the military, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the fluffy dog directly, but it would be the same algorithms that maybe could be used to do something harm. I think that it's really hard a priori to make a decision of any technology this cannot be used for harm. I just really, I think we need to find ways to be responsible with what we invent. That's.
I want to bring in Dominique, and then I don't know your name, but if you still have a comment after Dominique, so that'd be great.
So I have a question before we were asking the question was, are there things that we might want to mimic? And I want to counter that with the question is, based on what our perception is, what is the limit to where we think we want to limit something? Like perceiving like if we're like dangerous, it's like something correctly, and we can kind of like manipulate for our biomimicry, that's what our judgment has been meaning. So something complicated.
So what are the limits of what we might want to do?
Yeah.
With it as an approach?
Yeah, so I know someone asked, are there things we don't want to limit? But again, maybe how we perceive something that may push us to a point we want to limit something that we think we may not want to limit, or if we can kind of manipulate some things that we don't want to limit that can be of some kind of beneficial use for us as people, whether it's like in technology, medicine, or so I guess I would say, what is like the threshold, or how do we manipulate that threshold to push it a little bit further?
It's a good question, right? Are there ethical commitments that we should be making in this area that set limits to how we would use this approach, right? And just setting those limits prevent us from discovering things that might actually be beneficial, even if they're.
Who sets those limits?
Yeah.
Doesn't it circle back to the life's principles, though? I mean, because if you're not using harmful elements to create what you're creating, and if you're basing it on those 6 key principles, that's kind of should be self-governing, to a point. I mean, beyond the social ethical questions that I don't think biomimicry can answer, but I think if you stay true to the core, and I don't know how you police that, but it's, if people
that's part of the question.
Yeah, I mean, how do you, that's, there's no way.
We can invent a rainbow, but it's ultimately if that actor is going to shoot it from its stomach at you.
Yeah. I saw that.
He just shot it at you from behind.
Yeah. And kind of go on that, my question or comment was, is like, a lot of the discussion has been about insects or trees or that, how can we apply, but if we start mimicking in a deeper level the human body or experience, those are the things like, as the eventual brain computer, and that whole thing, especially if it experiences, has consciousness or those kind of things, or even having a dog's brain conscious in a box and stuff for tubes, and using it to like control stuff, would that be an ethical kind of thing? Like, so is that, are those, as we venture further into biotech, and there's a lot of questions are being asked, is it like, if it works, so that's,
All right, we're at the hour. We'll do like 1 or 2 more questions or comments, but these hours fly past so quickly. I'm always surprised. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is that now we are actually in the middle of the space phase, and I thought like, because I'm very interested in this engineers have some bias, but when we're moving to space, we're expanding on the existing technology that we have, and at the same time, they're trying to improve the technology using processes like biomimicry. So, let's say you want to mimic some sensory technology from some animal or some plant capabilities. How do you expand it to something, someplace like space, which the environment, the insect or animal probably has never been in? So, what are the challenges when you kind of move the environment where those sensors were not made for, or those capabilities were not made for?
NASA's doing a lot of biomimicry.
Yeah.
And NASA's doing a ton of work around biomimicry, but one of the principles is to be locally attuned and responsive. So depending on the place that you're at, if you're on the Martian surface or whatever, you're trying to use resources that are there. I mean, those are biomimicry principles, but it's not, you're not applying science that there are biomimicry that you're applying principles to that. You're using it for creating, flying, like not the one that they used on Mars. They're doing work around based on the maple, the maple seeds. Something that can fly in a more turbulent environment, and they're doing all kinds of different things. But I was surprised that all those rocket scientists are biomimics now. So
this is a really future, like doom level future type of question. But we think of design as the creation that's artificial. But all these things that we're circular around is sort of how our design processes are. Biomimicry is method. But is there a point in which biomimicry just is design? Like design? Because it seems like all the solutions that we're looking for are self-optimizing to sustainable life cycle too. Is it in a future where we don't blow ourselves up, everything is biomimicry? Everything is biomimicry?
Or is the innovation about the combination of biomimicry in new novel ways? Is that design? In ways that nature has not created.
One of the ways I look at this is that nature has been at the trial and error of solving things for much longer than we have. And so right now it's a very attractive way of shortening the kind of time it takes to get to a solution that may have already been optimized, at least in principle, in a particular situation. So I think it's a way of kind of, but we're increasingly able to shorten that life cycle of attempting designs and trying to solve for whether or not they might work for things with machine learning and other techniques. So how those two might go hand in hand with each other, kind of digitally or computationally prototyping something while at the same time looking at an analog prototyping that's occurred over 450 million years, for example. Those things, I think, are going to find really amazing synergies. Will the future be all biomimicry? I don't know. That would be a cool future.
Well, if we're not here, it will be.
That's right. All right, Jack, you want to have the last comment here?
Sure.
No pressure. Don't screw it up.
I was kind of something that popped in my head was like early Mesopotamian buildings would use an air conditioning system that was similar to those that were termite nails. And I was wondering, what kind of credence or like what kind of lessons can we learn from early humanity's attempts at biomimicry, and how can we apply those lessons to current attempts?
Many examples. I think question is why don't we do it often? I think that termite example was used in designing a building in Harare, Zimbabwe, and that building is there. But then you'll be surprised that that exact principles are not that common. You don't read a lot, you don't find many examples except for, even if you search or Google, you'll find that Zimbabwe, that building right there. There are a few examples, but the number of buildings still less. I think, I don't know what to say. If I have my own headquarters, if I have a company, I will go for biomimicry, bio-inspired design.
You can also turn the question around. So if you're saying it's not being used, does that just mean that it just doesn't work? Because if it were a very obvious solution to a problem, then it would be used all the time. So my gut feeling about that is it works, given that you need a lot of constraints. Like for example, you need to live in tiny corridors under the ground, or you need to build stuff made out of organic material, all that stuff. So if you find a great solution, think why it hasn't been used all the time. Usually the answer is because it works in a very narrow niche, and that's what animals are good at, exploiting narrow niches, and that's what evolution likes to do. Is that correct?
No, actually,
okay.
No, that's true. That's true for termites, and given that range, and then to answer this question, that maybe some of the principles like thermal stratification, natural ventilation, those principles are applied in buildings very commonly, but to some extent. Right, but not everything is applied. Otherwise, it would have been like it would be very challenging, as you were pointing out. But then the other point of like it's a very narrow niche. I think for us, very narrow niche is that thermal comfort range. Mm-hmm. We have like 68 degrees Fahrenheit to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. we have gotten so used to that. So I think it is a very narrow range in many ways as well.
Yeah, there's much more on that, right? It's also like which scale does it work at? Does it work on something that works in fluid dynamics on the scale of a termite hill doesn't necessarily scale up to something like a building, or the other way around. I mean, things you can do with buildings at that scale that don't work on a very tiny scale because things just work differently at a very tiny scale with fluid dynamics. So that's maybe what I meant with a niche. There are some physical principles you can't just get around as much as you would like to.
Scales is the term that I'll put it in a quote that we use very often, which is very true. Like something can work at component scale, but may or may not work at the building scale, may or may not work at the city scale. So that's actually very true. And again, and that's why going back to our earlier point in a discussion, actually point that you were asking, that so only then some shading devices can be mimicking, so those are only components, those are added, but not necessarily the whole building. For example, if airport building is to be biomimicked, but then you still have to enter, check in your luggage, right? I mean, get your ticket, check in your luggage. Some things have to work because building itself is an organism. When you can look at it that way, and it has to function its own ways. It can only adapt outside influences to a certain extent. And if I have to go a step further, airport as a building species can only adapt certain things. Residential building as another building species versus hospital buildings can adapt certain things. So I think I would say that variability may change according to building species.
But your airport will never have to play an egg with another airport in it. I mean, that's probably the point I'm trying to get at. Your airport doesn't have to start from 2 cells, right?
Yeah.
2 cells.
No.
Yeah. 2 cells. It doesn't have to build itself from the ground up and all that stuff. So I don't know whether it's good engineering stuff to begin with sometimes. Sorry to be.
Something to think about.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we could go on for much longer, but I think we should just say that this has been a delightful conversation that all of us have participated in. Let's give a round of applause to ourselves. I don't know when Fred will kick us out, but people are welcome to stick around for a little bit, explore the building. It's currently closed to the public, so this will be your last chance for a little while to be in here. Really neat building. The store is open if you want to grab a souvenir while you're here. I think Ryan's going to stick around just for a little while and play some more tunes. So thanks again for coming, and come to some of our future ones.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Dito, great point. The reason it doesn't work is scales. What works at this scale may not work at the bigger scale.
Yeah.
It is, there are actually many critiques. People think